Welcome in to the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast. Blaine Keller joined with the Titan insider himself, Terry McCormick. And for the second time all season, Terry, we're recording this show after a win.
Yeah, I mean, granted, wasn't a thing of beauty yesterday as they needed overtime and overcoming a desperation heave by Drake May that Ramondre Stevenson caught to send the game into overtime, but the Titans were able to get up off the deck and pick up their second win of the season.
Yeah, it took overtime, like you said, a last-second heave from Drake May. He stood in the pocket for 11 seconds, practically had days to complete that pass, but got it through to force overtime, and then former Patriot Nick Folk hits the field goal in the extra period to lead the Titans to their second win of the season. Maybe not so substantial of a win, Terry, in the minds of fans, but for the coaches and the players, it really seemed like so much was alleviated after this one.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Callahan even choked up in the press conference when he was asked how badly he and the team needed this win. So you could tell it meant a lot to him. And the one thing that I'll say for this group, and granted, this season has been a real struggle for this entire organization, but it is apparent that they believe in Brian Callahan. They like playing for Brian Callahan. You can kind of see that in the players, the way that they react when they're asked about him. And I think that, if that counts for anything, then maybe the results will improve on down the road as this team irons out some things and acquires more talent.
Like we said, it took overtime. The Titans took a couple of nicks and bruises along the way, but pulled out a 20-17 win against the New England Patriots. Stick around where we have Cory Curtis joining us to break that down and more on the other side of this break.
Being a part of a cooperative is being a part of something bigger. Farm Credit Mid-America is a customer-owned lender that specializes in agricultural financing for farm real estate, operating, and farm equipment. A unique benefit of being a part of the Farm Credit Mid-America Cooperative is our patronage program, which has put over $1 billion back in our customers' hands over the last 7 years. That's the power of a cooperative. Visit us at fcma.com to learn more.
I own the land.
I farm the land. Together we're farmers. This is our cooperative.
Back in on the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast. Stick around for later where we teased our Titans stock report. Now we're joined by News 2's Cory Curtis, who's at the game on Sunday. Cory, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Cory, we'll get right to it. This team, yesterday was seemingly the first time all season that they'd gotten up off the deck when something bad happened to them and actually responded with something positive and some success. And I know they were playing the New England Patriots, who aren't exactly world beaters themselves, but if you're the Titans, you have to take a little bit of consolation in the fact that you were able to get something done after surviving a gut punch, because the good teams in this league overcome their mistakes. I watched the Vikings and Colts last night, and Sam Darnold had a game where he threw 2 interceptions, one of them in the end zone, had a fumble on a strip sack that was returned for a touchdown. And yet the Vikings won by 8 points. And after they took the lead, it felt like it was never in doubt. If Will Levis or Mason Rudolph had that kind of game last night, the Titans would have lost by 20. So to me, it feels like that yesterday, even though it's a baby step, was a step in the right direction for what this organization has to start doing.
Well, they won, so that's a step in the right direction. But I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They tried to steal defeat from the jaws of victory desperately in that football game, whether it be 3 defensive penalties on the opening drive of the second half, whether it be the turnover. I mean, you got a 2-possession lead in your hands and you throw an interception at the goal line. I mean, even if you kick a field goal, you're up 2 possessions there on a bad football team, and you're in a good spot. You give up the touchdown to send it to overtime. Thank goodness the Patriots didn't go for 2 because that was setting up to be a disaster. And guys, Jaquan Jackson fumbled the opening kickoff of overtime, and Mason Rudolph dropped the snap at the 3-yard line. I mean, these, we joke about Rand saying the ball didn't bounce our way. They were really close to giving this thing away. I mean, really close. They tried. The Patriots just weren't good enough to do it. There's a lot that's good that happened. You're right. But they, Callahan has said it, and he is right. They have got to stop beating themselves because, fumbles and penalties are all things that they can control, okay? And they are not controlling them at this point.
Well, to me, it all boils down to this. They're not good enough to overcome their mistakes like the good teams in the league are. Patrick Mahomes has 9 interceptions this year, but the Chiefs are undefeated. The Vikings, like I said, turned it over 3 times last night, and they still won easily.
Well,
this team is just
have defenses that slam the door when they have to. And as good as we've said this defense is, they don't slam the door when they have to.
You're right. They do the opposite a lot of times. That's when they allow a big play to happen against them. Yesterday was the first time in the overtime that it felt like they didn't do that.
And here's a perfect example. On that game-tying touchdown drive for the Patriots, Jarvis Brownlee's got an interception at the 50. I mean, or was that the drive before?
No, I think it was that drive.
I believe actually Darrell Baker almost had the interception on the game-tying drive, and before that, Jarvis Brownlee had the near pick.
Brownlee had one in his hands that he just didn't hang on to. You have to make those plays. That's the difference between winning and losing. That's why when that ball went up at the end, and my first thought was, oh, gosh, he's got to step. And then I saw Hooker, and I said, oh, Hooker's got it. I said, he better catch it because if he drops it, they're going to find a way to lose. And, he came over and he made – but you have to make those plays. So you have to be able to get the snap on 3rd and 2 at the 3-yard line. I mean, it's the most basic thing you can do. It's maddening. It's maddening. There are a handful of plays that win and lose you football games. And right now, there are way too many handfuls of ones that lose them. And they can eliminate most of them. I mean, they had – I'm going to rant. I apologize. The opening defensive drive of the second half, they had 2 defensive penalties when the Patriots were facing, I think it was 2nd and 16 and 3rd and 15. Okay? You're committing defensive penalties when they are in extra long situations. I mean, that's just unacceptable. And then Roger McCreary gets called. How does a DB get a face mask, not tackling someone, but covering someone on 3rd down?
Away from the play. Away from the play, too. Wasn't even thrown in his direction.
Thank you. These are controllable mistakes. And Floyd Reese used to always say that if you're not teaching them, you're allowing them. Okay, this coaching staff I know isn't teaching that, but they're allowing too much of it to happen. How do you eliminate it? I don't know. I'm not a coach. I coach 11-year-old girls soccer. All right. I'm just trying to get them to cross the ball. I can't teach DBs how to cover in the NFL. It's really hard to do. It's why they make millions of dollars to do it, but they've got to do a better job of it because there are enough good plays for them to win football games. There are enough good players for them to win football games, but they can't do it and beat themselves at the same time.
All right, I'm gonna switch gears here, and this is going to be a little bit of a positive, but also a little bit of a negative. I think that now that I know it sounds crazy, but now that they have traded DeAndre Hopkins and that Traylon Burks has gone on injured reserve and is no longer having snaps wasted on
Addition by
him,
subtraction.
that I think that the wide receiver pecking order has kind of sorted itself out, that Calvin Ridley is now the number one, Nick Westbrook-Akine is the number two, and Tyler Boyd is the number three. And I think that combined with the fact that all three of those guys are usually in the right spot for the quarterback, we've seen an improvement in the passing game. Now, I'm not saying it's DeAndre Hopkins' fault because he's a future Hall of Famer, but I do think that there was some confusion maybe on the part of a young quarterback like Will Levis of, okay, do I feed Calvin? Do I feed D-Hop? Whereas last year, it was pretty much cut and dried. He had two choices. He could throw it to D-Hop or hand it to Derrick Henry. So, but now I think they maybe have sorted some of that out, and maybe this passing offense will improve. And then, like you said, addition by subtraction with Traylon Burks no longer getting the opportunities to touch the football.
Well, he didn't have those opportunities when he played, so there's really not a whole lot there. I mean, look, I like Traylon, and I like all these guys. I want them to succeed. It wasn't happening, and at some point, you have to acknowledge it's not happening. We need somebody who makes it happen. Nick Westbrook-Akine, he got 4 touchdowns now.
Yeah,
in 4
10
games.
catches.
He makes plays. He may be a Honda Accord, but he makes plays. And at some point, you got to go with the guy who you can count on, who you can trust, who's going to make plays. And I don't know how much to it there is of that whole pecking order, but I do think it is more clear cut for certain. And Ridley's got to catch the football more consistently, because you see when he does, he can be a difference maker for the football team. I mean, that third down catch he had yesterday was pivotal in traffic, caught it with his hands, took the contact, finished the play. He's got to make all those plays. He makes $24 million a year. He's got to make all those plays. It goes with the paycheck. It goes with he's the clear number one. It goes with being the clear number one. You have to make those plays. And so I think there's something to that. But I think the other thing that's gotten better is the pass protection. Titans gave up 1 sack yesterday. I think they've given up the least amount of sacks since week 5. Am I saying the offensive line is perfect at this point? No, I'm not. But the quarterback's not going back there and just getting smoked now like we saw for over a year. Mason Rudolph, has a chance. And Mason Rudolph also did a nice job of standing in the face of pressure and delivering the football yesterday. I mean, I think even the ball to Ridley on the third down, he had a man in his face. Sometimes it pays to be 6'6", and stepped up and threw the football. So I think there are multiple elements that have helped elevate the passing game. It'll be interesting to see if it can stay on that trajectory, when Levis comes back.
Yeah, and Cory, the offensive line outlook is going to kind of shift too, even though it's had a lot of success these past couple of weeks, even incrementally. Lloyd Cushenberry, likely out for an extended period of time, if not the season, with that ankle injury he sustained yesterday. How do you see the outlook of that kind of, changing from here with an alternating right tackle? And does Daniel Brunskill come in at that spot, or do they try to run Corey Levin moving forward?
Well, I think the question is Dylan Radins ready to come back? Because I think if Radins comes back, they likely pivot Brunskill back to the center and Radins to guard. We've all talked about Daniel getting a chance to play and not understanding why, with all the struggles. And look, did you guys see him as a problem yesterday?
No, not really.
He may not be their prototype lineman. Their prototype lineman is like 6'6", 340 pounds. They like huge dudes. And Daniel's not that. He's a blown up tight end. But at some point, you got to play your best football players. And I don't know that he's not one of their best 5. And if he's not the starting center and Dylan Radins is back, then maybe Daniel Brunskill is your starting right tackle. But they're not going to look at that. So I shouldn't even bring it up. But I would expect Brunskill to play center. Although Corey Levin, in his long storied journey of 17 releases with the Titans, I don't feel like he's ever done a terrible job when he's played. And he played yesterday when they drove down the field for the game-winning field goal. I don't know whose fault the snap was that got fumbled. I don't know if that's on the quarterback or on the center. And I do know some of the shotgun snaps were not things of beauty. But I don't fret Cory Levin playing the way I fret Nicholas Petit-Frere playing or John Ojokwu. But did you see John Ojokwu in motion?
Yeah. They should have thrown it to him.
I was just waiting to see if he fell over before he could get where he was going.
I wanted him to hand it to him on the jet sweep.
Yeah. Oh, that's not a jet sweep. That's more of like a U-Haul sweep. That's not that fast. But yeah, that's my really long answer is I expect Brunskill to be at 7.
Well, Cory, I think that's the extent of the questions we had for you today. Thanks so much for joining us on the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast, and looking forward to catching your coverage of the Titans all season long on News 2.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys, and enjoy this one. It might be the last one for a while.
Thanks,
Not the show, the victory.
Take one more break here on the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast. When we come back, Terry and I will give you our stat stuffers and our stock report. Stay tuned.
He shoots, and he scores!
Back on the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast, time for our Titans stock report. Terry, who's up first?
All right, I got to go with him again. Nick Westbrook-Akine. We talked about him during the segment with Cory. You know, all he does is catch touchdowns to, borrow the old Buddy Ryan quote about Chris Carter. So Nick Westbrook-Akine, 10 receptions this year and 4 touchdowns, certainly making the most of his opportunities. And that's something that the Titans have needed to help boost this passing game.
Terry, I wrote about this yesterday. The guy throwing him passes these past couple of games too maybe doesn't deserve a stock up all the way, but a stock even. It's been rather consistent for Mason Rudolph. Yesterday was 20 of 33 for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. As every other piece is shifted around him after DeAndre Hopkins leaves and Nick Westbrook-Akine becomes kind of implemented into the offense with multiple offensive lineman pieces shifting in this game. Mason Rudolph was steady and sure around a team that was pretty much falling apart alongside him.
Yeah, he really has kind of steadied the ship. And you wonder, to take nothing away from Will Levis, but you wonder if a second-year quarterback could have shown the poise and the calmness that Mason Rudolph has exhibited in the face of everything kind of shifting and falling apart around him. And so kudos to him.
Yeah, I'd give one more stock up maybe to the defense with their performance yesterday. Of course, Amani Hooker will be in our stat stuffers section with a couple of takeaways. And then the defense, Arden Key and Jeffrey Simmons combined for a turnover there, Terry.
Absolutely. One of the defense's better performances because they were able to get the football out. And like you said, we'll talk about that in our stat stuffer. But a couple other guys that need to be recognized for coming in because they lost Quandre Diggs early in this game. Mike Brown came in, gave them some decent work at the safety position. And then Cory Levin, who we talked about before, coming off the bench, a practice squad guy, veteran, comes in after Lloyd Cushenberry goes down and could be lost for the season. So he was able to get the job done at center, and the line only allowed 1 sack yesterday.
Yeah, the Patriots had pretty much every opportunity that they wanted to in the passing game after Quandre Diggs goes down. It looked like they were really trying to force the ball in the air when you've got a secondary that was Roger McCreary, Mike Brown, Jarvis Brownlee, and Darrell Baker. I mean, you already had a depleted secondary to that point, and they kind of held serve against a team that wanted to pass against them.
Yeah, I mean, really, the desperation heave at the end of regulation was really the only time that you felt like, that they got picked on. And that was just kind of a play that happened there that, where Drake May was able to keep the play alive and made a nice play. The one place where May did hurt them was with his legs. He had 95 yards on 8 scrambles. So that was one area where they weren't able to contain him. But by and large, a pretty solid effort. From the defense, there was a lot of bend but don't break because May did have a very high completion percentage. I think only 6 balls incomplete all day, and 2 of those, of course, were picked off. But certainly a bend but don't break type effort from the defense, and with the 3 takeaways.
May finished 29 of 41, but there was a stretch in the fourth quarter where he only had 3 or 4 incompletions.
Right. So, all the way around, it's something, while, like we said at the top, it wasn't a thing of beauty, but you certainly will take it if you're the Tennessee Titans. You can't afford to look any wins and look down upon any win at this point since you're 2-6.
Yeah. Terry, let's go ahead and move into our stat stuffer section.
The first number I'm going to throw out there is +2. And I think you know what that is. That means that they had 2 more takeaways than giveaways yesterday. In fact, 3 total takeaways from the game. The strip sack by Arden Key that Jeffrey Simmons recovered, and the 2 Amani Hooker interceptions. He now has all 3 of the Titans' interceptions this season. So the Titans gave it away once on the goal line interception that bounced off Chigakonkwo's hands, but +2. I think this is the first time this season that the Titans have been positive in the giveaway takeaway column.
That's something the coaching staff has mentioned each and every week. Glad to see it on the other side, maybe in the positive for once. Another positive number 4, Terry. As we mentioned, the defensive line really pressured Drake May quite a bit yesterday with 4 sacks. That's back-to-back games now that this defense has 4 sacks. You can kind of put an asterisk on it against Detroit, I think. Maybe not so much of those came in meaningful snaps. Those sacks did, but for Sunday, they certainly came at pivotal moments. And even in the points where it doesn't turn into a sack, there were a lot of pressures by this defensive line yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, it's those kind of things, the turnovers and the sacks and the pressures all seem to kind of go hand in hand, really, when you get right down to it. The rush and the coverage working together. And then I can't believe it's taken us this long to mention it. We're 23 minutes into the podcast. But the other number that really stands out from yesterday is going to be 128. And that's the number of yards that Tony Pollard had in this ball game. First 100-yard rushing day as a Titan, and the Titans needed every yard he gave them yesterday because he really, after not practicing all week with a foot injury, he really went out there and just carried the load for this offense, kept the pressure off of the passing game by giving the Titans something explosive in the run game, and was just a very consistent performer all day long. Brian Callahan couldn't say enough about Tony Pollard in his postgame press conference in terms of how he performed and under the circumstances that he did it.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, is that he did not practice a lick, a snap of the week, and he comes out and rushes for 128 yards, averages over 4 yards a carry, had 26 receiving yards too. Tony Pollard has been so close to 100-yard games this season. That was something we were talking about up in the press box, and he finally gets it. I'm sure that's a big boost of confidence, not only for him, but maybe the offensive line as well, to see that figure in triple digits.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, let's be honest here, with the way that this team is built and with what they have to do, I know that, in his heart of hearts, Brian Callahan would love for this team to be a pass-first team that uses the run to salt away games once the pass game has gotten you a lead. But that's not the way this team can operate right now because they can't protect the quarterback well enough, although that has gotten better. But they have been able to run block. So they're going to have to run to set up passing situations that are favorable to them to keep the pressure off the quarterbacks. And so by doing so, that means that Tony Pollard is the key cog in this machine for this Titans offense right now.
I'll give another kind of smaller stat stuffer to another running back. Julius Chestnut came in and had a couple of pretty decent runs in place of Tajay Spears. He had the 12-yard run that set up Nick Folk's field goal in the third quarter. Hurdled a defender, too.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a pretty impressive play on again, kind of another give-up run, surrender run that the Titans employed in the red zone on third down. But Julius Chestnut made the most of it on that one, picking up 12 yards.
Yeah, and got kudos to Titan Insider photographer Angie Flatt. She got a photo of, Chestnut in midair there during the hurdle.
Yeah.
So quite the shot that she pulled yesterday. We'll have that posted on the web at some point shortly.
Yeah, Terry, talk about Jack Gibbons' performance. Dr. Gibby had a stat-stuffing game that can't go overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. 14 tackles for Jack Gibbons yesterday. I'm not sure that very many people saw that kind of performance coming out of him because he had been a backup, or he had been the starter all through camp and preseason. They traded for Ernest Jones to start the year, and then Ernest Jones is dealt a couple of weeks ago, same day that DeAndre Hopkins was traded to Kansas City. Jones was sent packing to Seattle for Jerome Baker and a draft pick. And so Jack Gibbons re-inherits the starting job. First game in Buffalo and Detroit, not so great, or actually in Detroit, not so great. But yesterday he was all over the field with 14 tackles. Certainly, a performance worthy of mention, and one that really kept Jerome Baker on the bench for the entire game.
Yeah, I think the thought was whether or not Jerome Baker would get the start yesterday with him finally being active on this team. But Jack Gibbons proved that he belonged in that starting role. Like you said, 14 tackles. He had 2 tackles for a loss, a quarterback hit, and half a sack. Any other receiving performances, any other offensive standouts you want to mention, Terry?
Well, I want to throw out there, certainly Nick Westbrook-Akine continues to perform. Had 5 catches yesterday, including a touchdown. Calvin Ridley had a couple of big catches. I think he wound up with 73 yards receiving. Not quite as good as his 143-yard performance against the Lions the week before, but certainly some meaningful receptions that figured into the game, especially in the overtime drive. To me, the one element of the pass game that they have not yet gotten going, Tyler Boyd has really been kind of MIA in this offense. He's not been targeted very often, and he's not had very many receptions. The reception against Miami before the half from Mason Rudolph that set up a field goal, a walk-off field goal at the end of the first half, is really the one key moment he's had this year. I think they've got to start finding ways to try and incorporate him to this offense and get him some touches.
Really interesting. Tyler Boyd did not record a reception, was not targeted yesterday. It feels like while he's kind of been implemented out of this offense, Nick Westbrook-Akine, of course, has been implemented in. The tight ends have been a huge factor as well. Nick Van Nett had that opening touchdown drive, and Chikakonkwo almost had the other touchdown that would have put Tennessee up 2 scores had it not fallen out of his hands. Terry, just closing thoughts on Tyler Boyd maybe not being able to find a significant role despite his connection with Callahan.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because he still is a starter because 3 wide is the Titans' base offense. But of late, it feels like they've been having to go with a little bit more of 2 tight end personnel, 12 personnel, if you will. And maybe that is simply because they have to have those tight ends in to help block.
We'll see how Tyler Boyd's production figures throughout the rest of this season. Tennessee next week at the Chargers, a venue they haven't won in their franchise's history. Chance for Brian Callahan's first winning streak. We'll have coverage of that in the coming week. Be sure to check us out. Thanks for tuning in to the Tennessee Pro Football Podcast.